Hello, welcome to Human Resources 06302. This is Professor Casper. Glad you could join me today, and this is the first lecture of the class. We will be doing an HR overview, talk about some of the trends that affect human resources. Please listen to the lecture in its entirety. When you're finished, there are other readings within this module that you need to take a look at, as well as take a quiz. So let's go ahead and get started, shall we? There you go. What do we, or you as members of this class, what do we need to know about human resources management, or HRM? Well, we ought to know what HR does, what they do as a function. I recall many times being asked, well, in human resources, what do you do? What does human resources do? It's not something that everybody knows a great deal about. I remember once I was introduced as the HR guy. He's the one who does your dental forms. How human resources contributes to an organization's performance. It's just not a nice to have a human resources group. We need to contribute to the bottom line. And we'll talk about how HR does that. We're also going to take a look at the careers available to people interested in human resources. So let's get started. We know that in human resources, or in business in general, not in human resources, the logo seems to be that people are our most valuable asset. And I just did a quick Google search on people being our most valuable asset. And the image bin was filled with different ways of saying it. But it seems like almost every company wanted to say, hey, we love people. People are the most important asset, resource that we have. They wanted to make their statements different. We're not just saying that. We really mean it. I love this one. Will you be one of our greatest assets? Maybe my favorite one right there. So what do we mean when we say this? Well, it doesn't mean that we're going to make a workplace in which you don't have to work, which you get to play all the time. Who wouldn't want to work in a job where you have 4 months off every summer, long Christmas breaks, and only work a couple of days per... Oh, wait a minute, that's a college professor's job. Well, maybe there's other jobs like that, but what does it mean to say people are our most valuable asset? Does it mean we treat them differently than we might otherwise if we realize that? What does it really mean to say that people are our most valuable asset? All right, there is a business strategy a business strategy theory out there called the resource-based view, RBV. Basically, what it says is that a firm or a company's competitive advantage is a result of resources that are four things, basically. Valuable. I think valuable is a given. You want a pile of gold, or you want a pile of dirt? Gold. Rare. The resource, by definition, must be rare. If I have a pile of gold and a big tank of water and the world is out of water, that rarity of the water makes it more valuable. Maybe not a great example, but it has to be rare. You can't imitate. You cannot easily imitate that resource. You can't imitate water for Diet Coke, for example. And finally, it must not be substitutable. You can't put something else in its place that will work just as good, something different. So you can't say I got a pile of gold and a pile of lead. And although the malleability properties are the same, lead doesn't substitute for gold. So even if their resource is rare, potentially value creating, and imperfectly imitable, an equally important aspect is this lack of substitutability. Those are some tough words. So, building a little bit more on this, the RBV provides the practical justification for key aspects of a firm's HR policies and practices, such as human capital management, talent management, knowledge management, and learning and development. All of those things help us to create and maintain competitive resources, human resources. In the resource-based view, the firm is seen as a bundle of tangible and intangible resources and capabilities required for product market competition. The RBV builds on and provides a unifying framework for the field of strategic human resources management. Boxall pointed out that the resource-based view of the firm provides a conceptual basis, if we needed one, for asserting that key human resources are sources of a competitive advantage. The strategic goal emerging from the resource-based view will be to create firms which are more intelligent and more flexible than their competitors, by hiring and developing more talented staff and by extending and expanding upon their skill base. Resource-based strategy is therefore concerned with the enhancement of the human or intellectual capital of the firm. Dave Ulrich, one of my favorites, you'll hear me quote him a lot in this class, commented, "Knowledge has become a direct competitive advantage for companies selling ideas and relationships. The challenge to organizations is to ensure that they have the capability to find, assimilate, compensate, and retain the talented individuals that they need." The significance of the resource-based view of the firm is that it highlights the importance of a human capital management approach to human resources management. This provides the justification for investing in people through resourcing, through talent management, through learning and development programs as a means of enhancing competitive advantage with an emphasis on building flexibility and developing the integrative linkage. So, valuable, rare, inimitable, non-substitutable are known. Of course, we have to have this acronym as VRINs, VRINs. Also help us to remember it: valuable, rare, inimitable, and non-substitutable. Now, when we talk about human resources, as we just did, being a portion or a part of the company that can provide a competitive advantage by using the people resource, we can picture in our minds different companies or sports teams that have people that provide a competitive advantage. So, Michael Jordan did it. I think even if you're not from this country or you are not a big basketball fan, you are familiar with Michael Jordan. He created a sustainable competitive advantage for his team, for the Bulls. His performance was certainly valuable. He had rare skills. He could not easily be imitated or guarded or anything else. And there was no substitute for him. You couldn't put 2 or 3 big men on him and guard him. Just no substitute for him. And this was in his role in the company, the Bulls. Now, did he provide an equally competitive advantage for the Barons? Let's just say no. So what is human resources? What is human resources management? You should memorize this. It's pretty simple. But human resources management is managing the policies, practices, and systems that influence employee behavior, attitudes, and performance. So close your eyes and say it with me one more time. The policies, practices, and systems that influence employee behavior, attitude, and performance. Oftentimes, human resources is not seen. They're behind the scenes. They influence employees through policies and practices by way of their supervisors, the employee supervisors. Oftentimes, they are out in front. So, what are the functional processes? What are the stewardship and functional processes in human resources? What are the different areas of HR? Well, let's talk about first something that's called a job analysis. Job analysis is the process of getting detailed information about jobs. Job design is the process of defining the way the work will be performed and the task that a given job requires. So, although not necessarily an area, a functional area listed, these are my job analysis analysts, it is a core portion of the human resources process. You look at the job, we'll talk about this more in detail, but job analysis. HR planning basically is identifying the number and types of employees the organization has and that it requires to meet its objectives. Now, the HR department will be looked upon as somebody who knows how to count, to create, and to look at the numbers. I remember I was talking to the VP of HR for Dell, and he mentioned to me that once he got there, was working with Kevin Rollins at the time. He said that they needed the numbers first. Nothing else mattered until they could give them good people counts. Well, it seems like it should be pretty easy to count how many people that you have. It's really quite complicated, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. So, HR planning, how the numbers and types of employees needed is part of HR planning. So we've got recruiting. So recruiting is creating pools of qualified applicants and making them or encouraging them to be interested in working for your company. Now we can have interviewing and selection as one group. And interviewing and selection is how you go from identifying qualified candidates to selecting the best one, the one that will make a difference in your organization. I may need to mention that almost each of these 8 bubbles or functional processes in human resources management has a whole semester class, maybe even more, devoted to explaining them in detail. So I'm going to splurge and give each one about a minute. Training. Training is a planned effort to enable employees to be able to learn job-related skills. And if we add development to that, it is the acquisition of key skills, knowledge, and behaviors that will improve an employee's ability to change in the job requirements and based on customer needs. Compensation and benefits. We've heard a lot about comp and benefits in the news. It's the decision of how much salary, wage, bonuses, commissions, and other performance-related to pay that the company offers, which benefits to offer, and how much they'll cost. And then there's always the administration of these systems, which is very complicated. How do you keep track of the compensation? How do you do salary surveys? Which benefit systems do you adopt? How do you offer those to the employees? How do you collect their payroll inputs? A lot of extensive record keeping and reporting is needed. So performance management is also a critical area of human resources. It's the process of ensuring that an employee's activities and outputs match the organizational goals HR department is usually responsible for developing and managing some type of system that helps evaluate and measure performance, employee performance. Employee relations, it's really a large area here dealing with employee relations. It deals with things such as preparing and distributing employee handbooks and policies, company publications, newsletters, dealing with and responding to communications from employees, sometimes the very hard questions that supervisors can't answer, helping to resolve disputes between employees and possibly between supervisors or supervisors and their employees. I'm going to include in this labor relations. We're not going to talk about unionization or being represented very much in this class. There's, again, a class completely devoted to that, but it could involve labor relations, dealing with unions. Then the communication of the policies we discussed. Communication of the policies such as how do we hire, how do we discipline people, how do we decide on promotions, how do we select benefits. Again, all areas of human resources management require careful and discreet record keeping. So those are the functional processes in human resources: job analyses, HR planning, recruiting, selection, training, comp and benefits, performance, employee relations. Now, overarching this entire scenario, all of these functional processes, is something that we call the law. And I think that I'm actually going to, yes, there it is. Have a very slow graphic come in, but each and every one of these areas that we talked about is governed by a law. So there's certain parameters and guidelines that must be followed legally when we implement and talk about each and every one of the systems or the functional areas that I just presented. So compliance to the law. Different things that are needed to comply with the law. It could be something as small as filing different reports to displaying posters, certainly avoiding unlawful behavior in the workplace. The managers depend and require human resources to help them with progressive discipline, with other feedback or write-ups that can be kept in a desk, what can be said, what can't be done, the whole myriad of things that you would appreciate. We are not lawyers, and we have to be very careful not to become practicing lawyers within the field of human resources, because sometimes it feels like we need to. We're on the front line with this every day. So a smart HR will learn enough about the systems to know how to deploy, explain, train, and handle, and will know at what point he or she needs to seek legal counsel. So there's me. I'm an HR guy. So what I wanted to say was HR managers, or HRs in general, can be held personally responsible for adhering to all governmental requirements, including these filings, displaying posters, adherence to law in areas including affirmative action, civil rights, payroll tax, record keeping, that's just to name a few. Now, also required is required to maintain a harassment-free environment. We'll talk a little bit more about what that means to create a harassment-free environment. But as a manager, especially a human resources person, if we are lax in our responsibilities towards the law, we can be held personally responsible and actually be levied fines and jail time. So beyond what we talked about with respect to HR, their functional areas of expertise or their stewardships, there are some dynamics that I want to show or to talk about that make a human resources a strategic partner. And that's what we're all striving to be within a business, is somebody who can make a difference, that can work on the strategy of a company, help determine and develop profit lines and the best decisions with good input from everyone at the table. And we certainly in human resources always have and do, always will want that seat at the table. So if you look at this chart that I have laid out here, it shows HR professionalism there at the bottom. At the top, it talks about organizational capabilities. See if I can do this. These capabilities, system processes, and relationships. So that's a little bit more of an ethereal view of what an organization consists of, rather than say compensation and benefits which are more functional. So, and we look at, hey, how does this affect the people in the organization? Because human resources, they are responsible for the people processes. And the business, we're all business partners. We're all part of the business trying to make things profitable. So what within those parameters can make a person a strategic human resources partner rather than just a personnel manager or a recruiter or an HR generalist? Well, we can start at the top. Talent manager and organizational designer. Now, that may be one of the most important things that human resources has begun to, it continues to focus on, is bringing in the Michael Jordans, their assets, talent, creating organizations in which they can flourish, and trying to keep them within that organization. Culture and change steward. Well, that involves implementing strategies, projects, and initiatives and help turn what is known into what is done. All HR persons, all HR should have a change script, a strategy, a model. There's lots of them out there memorized. So as we go through change and change in the organization, they'll understand and know a process to help the organization go through change successfully. Now, strategy architect requires that vision of how the organization can win in the future. It demands an active part in establishing overall strategy, decision, and goals for an organization. We've come down to the next level. Operational executor includes things such as drafting and adapting, implementing policies that will help you and the organization meet employees' basic needs as well as the goals of the organization. But things such as being paid, the relocation, transfers, and all those activities must be done efficiently and be done very well. It's a story about HR director who was hired and fired the next week because he didn't get the the new CEO's secretary's paycheck out in a timely fashion and correct. Nothing will happen or no respect will be given to a human resource person until they get everybody paid on time. And they got to know how to count how many people. So let's talk about business ally. You can't just be an HR person. You have to understand the business. First thing that you have to do is learn the business. So know the social settings that the company operates in. Know how the company makes money, who the customers are, who the competition is, and have a basic understanding of the finance and marketing decisions that are important to the organization. So talent manager, if I go back up a little bit to talent management, because I'm thinking about that, I didn't do enough on talent manager. So talent management focuses on how individuals enter, move up, across, and out of the organization. Organizational design then focuses on the capabilities of an organization and how they are embedded in the structure, policies, and procedures that shape how the organization works. So now we're going to get down to the last one, which is a credible activist. So you have to build trust. You have to be credible. You have to have ideas based on all the aforementioned material. So once you know what can or should be done from a credible fashion that it will help improve the bottom line, then you have to be an activist, a proactive activist that can get things done and accomplished. It's often said that HR is on the fence between workers and management. Well, for the sake of clarity, HR works for the company, but they are tasked with improving the sustainable competitive environment. Historically, HR were called personnel. They were clerks, keeping up with payroll, paperwork. It's very different from the strategic HR partner model that we just put here. Now, if you go back to the functional area of support for human resources, payroll, benefits, some of those could still be people who keep files, who are not necessarily strategic partners. But I think most everybody I've ever talked to wants to be in this inverted triangle, the strategic HR partner, and be accepted as an HR partner. And these are the competencies, the blue, green, and red circles that many of the talent managers, the well-known figures, present as the skills and competencies necessary to become a strategic HR partner. So, HR responsibilities. When in HR is within an organization, they have responsibility to the function as well as the organization to make decisions that help management see decisions that result in the greatest good for the largest number of people. Make sure that politics isn't being followed, that an organizational leader isn't, 20 people need to be terminated and he's protecting this group, whereas for the organizational good, it should be others. She must look across the organization, make sure that the hard decisions are still resulting in the greatest good for the largest number of people. And sometimes that means you have to terminate or you have to lay people off. You've got 1,000 employees. For example, if you have 1,000 employees and enough money to keep running for a month at your burn rate, or you can let 400 of them go immediately and keep the remaining 600 for indefinitely as the product improves, and maybe even hire people back in the future. So really, although it's painful and not necessarily what anybody wants to do, the decision resulting in the greatest good for the largest number of people is laying off those people immediately. You need to make sure that basic rights of privacy, due process, consent, and free speech are being consistently taught and exemplified and being put forth as visions and guidelines that your company wants to follow. Now, you have a special role in human resources to help treat employees and customers, certainly, equitably and fairly. Now, do HRs work for people or do they work for the organization? Well, the bottom line is they work for the organization. Their paycheck is signed by the CEO, just like any other employee. So you should not lose track of that they're not a union steward there to represent you and your interest against whatever the company decides. They might help wrangle some decisions through with respect to a person being treated unfairly based on the decisions being made, or help employees through a number of difficult times. But they still work for the organization, and sometimes the decisions that result in the greatest good for the largest number of people mean that you might have to be terminated. So let's look at HR careers. There's lots of HR careers that are in the human resources function, and this is a source from Salary Wizard at salary.com, showing the position, Director of Human Resources, average pay rate, $140,000. These appear to me to be not total cash, but base rate. Health and safety managers sometimes are and sometimes are not in the human resources function. And for all practical purposes, I'm going to consider that they are not part of the human resources organization. It's coming from my background in oil and petrochemicals, it's a very different and very knowledge-intensive area. Human resources managers, 85, senior compensation analyst, 80, HR specialists, maybe around 50, recruiters, about 50, trainers, looks like about 50, and the entry-level benefits administrator, probably paid on an hourly basis, anywhere from, my experience has been 30 to 40,000. Now, are there other careers in human resources and other ways to get into human resources? Sure. But this can give you an idea of some of the average pay rates for some of the jobs in human resources. So, we have discussed HR trends. We have looked at HR jobs, careers, and some of the maybe hidden or new ideas that will give you a better understanding of what human resources is about. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to seeing you soon.